a weekend like this is quite rich, and it becomes a little bit difficult to unpack. It's a little bit like spiritual indigestion. You sit in your cars heading home this afternoon wondering what just happened. But when we weave these things together, we begin to see a pattern. Something emerges, something deeper and richer than us, and that's the gift of being here. One of the many, many blessings of my job, and this is a real blessing, is I get to read these documents not just once, but over and over and over again. Now what it doesn't make is it doesn't make me holier than you. But what it does do is it gives me a gift of you begin to notice echoes. You begin to notice things that are repeated often. And so with this last 3/4 of an hour, at least of our speaker time, what I'm going to do, if you don't mind, is weave a few threads that run through these documents. Not my favourite clips, but rather things we notice Pope Francis saying about the character of us and of disciples often. That's what I'm going to do. And to illustrate the point, I'd like to just explain it, if you don't mind, and some of you have seen me do this before, but Bishop Mark will be very familiar with this. This is a map of the 4,000 tunnels, miles of tunnels under London. Obviously we call it the Tube. And in 1923, a man called Harry Beck said, well, rather he was told, nobody can read that. And so he looked at the map and came up with this. And that changed the way maps are drawn all over the world. Because if you go into any city in the world now, you'll find maps that look like this. Now what makes me smile, now that one of my children lives in London, is until you go there, you don't realise that everything on that map is a lie. You know, I meet people who think that if they come out at St Pancras and start walking in a straight line, they will come to Farringdon. You do know, don't you, that that's not what the tunnels look like. This is what they look like. Now, can I just explain? I like to work with metaphor. I've spent a lot of time trying to work out what it is that I do for a living. And I think that what I do, and I think that what disciples do, is they do that to the map of faith so that people can access it. And in accessing it, they begin to live their lives differently. That is what our lives look like. That's why going home is always a little bit odd or painful, because our lives are like that. But what happens on a weekend is you just get a tiny glimpse of clarity and order, and priorities rise and distractions wane, and we just grow a little closer to him in the doing of that. And for a moment, things seem okay. But the journey back is to that one. And that one isn't a bad place. It is stunningly beautiful. But it is, as Pope Francis calls in Amoris Laetitia, he uses this phrase, I love this phrase, learn it, 2 words, wonderfully complicated. He says life is wonderfully complicated. Now sometimes when we're at these events, we just want to live there. And it's okay. It's okay to want to live there, but that's not what we're called to. We're going home, folks, and it's a mess. Understand? And I'm going to say something else to you. We're going home and it's a mess, and God loves it. Just like that. Now, you know, I'm looking forward to the kingdom of heaven. I know that there's going to be such clarity there, and it's been promised to me, so I'm going. It's not me I trust in, it's him. But there's a way of living in this, and Pope Francis is wonderfully astute at writing about it. So I'm going to have a go at just a few tips. I'm cautious about this, but I've learned something yesterday, which is to say, if you're going to say you're going to do 5 things, you can still do 3. But if my apostle can do it, I'm going to follow him. And it goes a little bit like this, and then just at the end of the talk, you just say, and the other 2 were better than the first. Okay, 5 tips from Pope Francis. 5 tips from Pope Francis, and these beautiful tips, in a sense, are, you know, if you read the documents, you might find others. There's wisdom here from the Church, and I'm just going to run through these a little bit quickly. I hope you'll forgive that. I should have said this at the beginning, and a lot of you are used to this. The last slide will have my email on it. So for people who like but don't want to write or want to remember any of this, you just email me afterwards and I'll send it to you. So number 1 is keep it real. Now these are going to be shockingly obvious for a moment, but well, bear with me. Pope Francis often writes, and he does this in 3 introductions of those 4 documents. We do well to focus on what he calls concrete realities. You see, the mess of the tunnels. Since the call and demands of the Spirit resound in the events of history. Now, what does that mean? Sometimes when people talk about calling, you imagine you're going to be perhaps called to some distant land, because they're the images we're often given. The call is often, forgive me, back into the detail of our own lives. It's tempting to imagine that surely a call will take me somewhere else and it'll all be new. But actually, the call is often, forgive me, to go and be him to the people who are already with you. To the confused and the bewildered, the aging parent, the disillusioned young person, the baby in your child's arms that you'd rather like to baptise because your kids won't. All those confusions that we're carrying around in our lives. Often our call is back to that mess, but it's very, very real. Now look, the opposite to this is what he calls idealization, and sometimes at events like this we can rather do this to ourselves and then feel a little disappointed. We're not going to feel disappointed. It goes a little bit like this. Excessive idealization, especially when we've failed to inspire trust in God's grace, has not helped to make vocation more desirable and attractive, but quite the opposite. I'll tell you what we do sometimes is we raise our expectations so high, and we kind of go, and we imagine we've got to go back, and there will be a series of wonderful conversions next week, and and we long for Acts chapter 2, and that week 2,000 were added to their number, and then sometimes it doesn't quite work out like that, and then we implode a little bit on ourselves and start to feel down. Look, be careful, Pope Francis says. Just be careful. Every holiday brochure you look at will have families in it that just look perfect. And these people are good people, but notice how consistent the image is. And an image of Christmas, Google it. It'll be expensive, it'll be sumptuous, it'll be a banquet, and everybody's happy. And I've never met anybody who's had a Christmas like that. All these idealizations we put on ourselves sometimes make us miserable. Happy ever after. Well, one of the lovely things about teasing out the chapters in Amoris Laetitia is people say to me at the end of a session, they'll say, David, I've been listening to you and the magic's gone out of our marriage. And I go, well, of course it has. That's what happens. It's what you do next that matters. It's this sort of idea that we can live our lives in a honeymoon, and then rather life is painful, and we wait for the new springtime. There's a lot of ideas out there that are not good for us. You know, my sons at the moment, we're talking a lot about love because they keep falling in and out of love. It's just exhausting. And part of me is really jealous because it's just so vibrant and exciting and the wonder of people. But you know, the conversations we're having all the time are things like, you know, I want to find the perfect one for me, and I'm going, she's not there, mate. And she wouldn't want to be perfect for you anyway, because she wouldn't want to be found out. It's more complicated than that. Every romantic comedy we ever watch on the television, it's too simple. Boy meets girl or girl meets boy, they get together, they have a row, it's terrible, sad, they fall apart, then one of them realises that they've got it wrong, and then the film concludes with a mad dash to the airport and a bended knee and a let's stay together forever, and then we get happy ever after at the end. And you go, that's not life. So, meet the family, and of course when you have these pictures, they just look ideal, don't they? I show this picture and people go to me, oh, what a lovely family. What a lovely family. They go, lovely, look at that, lovely family. We hate each other. You know, so I had this strange experience a couple of years ago. I shared this with a few of you. I'm at a lectern in the States, and they're live streaming it around the world, which means that these are watching me at home in Exmouth giving a talk at 2 o'clock in the morning on the other side of the world. What an amazing world we live in now. And halfway through I'm being deep and meaningful in this arena, and then on the phone pops up a few words and it just says, Dad, you're an idiot. Look at how Pope Francis writes about the ordinariness of things, as a virtue. He says no family can be fruitful if it sees itself as overly different or set apart. To avoid this risk, we should remember that Jesus' own family, so full of grace and wisdom, did not appear as unusual. Did you, I mean, you know, I've often thought to myself, if you'd met the Holy Family, you would have been in very good behaviour. The evidence appears to be that you wouldn't have known they were the Holy Family. This is a carpenter's son. And in the encounter of the concrete, something is going to be revealed to you. So be careful what you think holy people look like. Which of those four do you think is a saint of the church? We tend to imagine that this journey that we're on is going to make us somehow otherworldly. We have a Holy Father, a Pope, who's saying to us at the moment, don't go after the extraordinary. It's in the detail of your life. You see, it turns out God's in the detail. And it's exciting then, because it gives colour and texture to Tuesdays in February. And how we long for the next retreat. I'm trying to do these really quick, folks, so bear with me. There will be a brief break in a minute. The second one we've heard a lot of during the course of the last 2 days, which is don't travel alone. You don't need to travel alone. Stay intimate. We know this, we've heard it during the course of our time. Right, oh, stop it. You know, all I need to wake a group up is a picture of a duckling. You know, life is, can I just say, just so you know this, you do know, don't you, that discipleship is messy and tricky and awkward and embarrassing. And sometimes you're left wondering if you made any difference whatsoever. I love my life. Ali and I were chatting the other day, and we're going through some changes in our circumstance at the moment, and we were talking to each other, and we had the privilege. This is God-given. It's not by any virtue of my own, but we looked at each other and we said, you know, if our time was up now, I'd be very grateful. I would. I wouldn't feel cheated, because I've been so blessed, not by my own virtue, but by grace. And as a result of that, I find myself looking back and thinking, I don't know if I made a difference. I don't. I've been called too Catholic. I've been called not Catholic enough. I've been criticised by people outside the church and inside the church. In the end, it's still a joy, isn't it? Like, you can live with that stuff. But it is hard. It's just hard being authentic. Even now I'd like to impress you, and I have to suppress that desire. and tonight I'll be insecure about you. But that's how it works. It always did. And so I need to stay close to him because he comforts me. I don't quite know how, to be honest. I love this. This is André Lénard. The first proclamation, namely that Jesus Christ loves you, he gave his life to save you, and now he's living at your side every day to enlighten, strengthen for you, isn't beginning Christianity. That's not beginner's Christianity. That's all of it. And without it, and he puts this beautifully, without it we lose the perfume of God. That's the perfume of God, the Holy Spirit, just that sense that we're not on our own, folks. And walk with him. He walks hand in hand with us. And so we heard from Bishop Mark yesterday, and Pope Francis keeps using this word, encounter, that the Lord is to be met rather than understood. This is what I keep saying to the teachers in our schools. The difference is you talk about Napoleon, you're introducing Jesus, and he's there. That's the difference. And so as a disciple, I'm pretty capable of getting it wrong. I know I'll make mistakes, and I know I can get things upside down. But do sometimes when I'm in particularly tricky situations, I've been trying over the last few years to speak at conferences that aren't Christian. And I've been in some schools in our diocese. I was in Torquay Grammar School recently as the Christian. It's quite interesting then, because I realise I've spent most of my life talking to groups that already agree with me. Like us, really. But the interesting thing is when it boils down to it and you take the layers and layers and layers away, I end up saying one thing, and it's, I can't prove these things, but I am going to tell you that I do know that he loves me. I do know that, and that I'm going to be all right. I'll keep messing up, I know that, but I do know that he loves me. And you'd be surprised how many people are attracted just to that. People want to be loved, That's not beginner's Christianity. That's probably where I'm hoping to be on my deathbed. And we have these beautiful images of staying close to the Lord, being a vine grafted on. If you have never been to a vineyard, and I know some of you have, get yourself to a vineyard. There's a pebble bed vineyard at Topsham. I know it's not the south of France. But you can see where vines are grafted onto vines. And I've looked at that, where you literally split a branch and you put another branch into it. And a vine will send sap into a branch that's called grafted into another one. And Jesus gave us that image for our relationship with him. Be grafted onto him. Know where the source of your power is. Know where the sap is coming from. Now, if I can stay close to him, I'm still going to make mistakes, but I do know I'll be all right. That's all. It's not about performance. And so, as Pope Francis did last week, he keeps imploring us into that fresh encounter. Meet him. Keep imagining that you're not. Keep saying hello. That personal. Keep saying hello. I'm still on track. Are we all right? I love this one. Pope Francis writes a lot about this. And of course, a series of virtues are interchangeable here. But one of the things that in response to that sap that flows through us from him, one of the things is, will you please cheer up? And I mean it. I mean it. Let's have a little look at this. Oh, that's a shame. So there's a bit of an article there. I don't quite know it's done why it's done that. But look at this. 7 priests walk into a bar and get kicked out by staff who think they're on a stag do. It's true, it happened. There's a lovely picture of these guys all having a pint. But do you know, one of the things is, actually, they probably ended up being evangelizers by being kicked out of a pub. And the skill is to not take it too seriously. So my dad's dying, I get the phone call, I get in a car, I drive up the M1 to be there in time, I make it, but en route, I buy a journal. Because I think that everything I'm about to learn in the next few days, I need to remember. And we're all sitting around his bed, and he's weak and lying there, and every time he tried to speak, I was going, shh, Dad's going to say something. and I can remember my dad looking at me like he did quite often. And, even now I'm dying, and you're still a fool. And I said, because I had the privilege of knowing, and some of you lost people suddenly, because I had the privilege of knowing, I was able to ask him the good questions. And when somebody's dying, they're going to give you good answers, surprisingly brief often. And I said to him, of all the things you taught me, what do you want me to remember? Of all the things you taught me, what do you want me to hear again and again? And he just looked at me and he took my hand and he said, don't take yourself too seriously. The words of a dying man. All right? It's God's problem. All those people who are not coming to church, God's problem. We're gonna be his workers. But sometimes, I will take it all onto myself. The future of my children, the health of my parents, everything. I can start to make it my job. And the Lord's saying, do you know something, David? It just weighs you down, and then I can't use you. Now, notice how the language he uses. I'm going to put a little wager to you here. We're going to have the next document is going to be about young people. I don't know whether you know that. But one of the interesting things, I'm going to put a little wager that this phrase is going to appear in the introduction of that document, because I've seen it twice now. In the case of Amoris Laetitia, notice the language. Families are not a problem to be solved. Now, I'm just going to put a little wager. I don't know this. My instinct is that in the next document, we're going to have a sentence that reads, young people are not a problem to be solved. The reason being that that's the wrong place to start, because it puts us in the wrong place. If you notice, we are quickly assuming things, and we put ourselves in the role of judge. And we don't mean to, but we've done it in our language very quickly. For this Pope, the most important thing is, don't worry why they're not there. Learn how to embrace them. The first action of the church is always mercy. Then we'll work out what the problems are. The first action of the church is always, always, always mercy. And then we'll work out what the problems are, the strategic problems, the pastoral problems. The first thing somebody needs to know is that we love them. And when they learn that, we are irresistible, even me at 56. I haven't really got to done. I'm just going to tell you this one story because I'm keeping my eye on it. I had a really amazing experience last year. Last year I was invited to go and work with some catechists in Auckland in New Zealand. It was a real privilege, a big conference there. And when I got there, I'd not really read my history books, and I love history. And I didn't know a lot about New Zealand, but one of the things that was curious is, why is it a British colony with a Dutch name? It's New Zealand, it's not New Exmouth. Understand? And it turns out there was a series of incidents that explain this, but there was one experience I just want to share with you, which I found fascinating. Have you ever come across the hacker? Yes. Okay, so I go to this conference and I get out of the taxi, and do you know how they welcomed me? With that. Now, honestly, I don't know whether you've ever faced a haka. I'd only ever seen it on a rugby pitch. That's why it's the only place I'd seen it. So, this happens, I'm standing there, and these warriors come out in a line, they're honestly big guys, and one of them, well, they all had spears, but one of them is in front of me, and he's doing that it's almost demonic, the faces. You know, wide eyes, big tongues, and then he takes this spear, honestly, okay, and it's interesting the way he's holding it. So he's pointing down, he's got the back end of the spear up there, and then he inverted it so the blade came up, and then he took one step forward, and honestly, ladies and gentlemen, that spear was 3 inches away from the front of my face. When they're doing it on the rugby pitch, they're not carrying spears. And do you understand when I say this to you? I remember standing there thinking, I've just come to talk about Jesus. I don't want to die. And then, from amongst this line of warriors emerges this young woman, and she comes before me, and she lays down a small casket on the floor, and then steps back. And I didn't know what to do. What do you do? I'm just a catechist from Devon. And fortunately, somebody who knew me was able to go, pick it up. Pick it up. So I gingerly, tentatively, anxiously stepped forward and picked up the casket. And then the line of warriors opened up, and I was invited into the hall where there was a banquet. Now what just happened there was interesting for me. I asked them what it meant. Captain Cook, when he arrived in New Zealand, had somebody on the ship from Tonga who knew what to do. And it was as simple as this. It was as simple as this. For these warriors, you place a gift on the ground, and if you don't pick it up, they will kill you. Why? Why? Because they understood all those centuries ago that, you know something, if you pick something up, you have to put your spear down. Now what was going on, it goes back centuries, was this: put down all that stuff you're carrying, all those weapons of self-justification and anxiety, and will it be all right, and am I holy enough? All those weapons of self-defense, your shield of they'll never get to know me, and I'm keeping that from them, and all these weapons that we bring with us into every meeting. And taught by these Maori people, the idea was, put your weapons down and pick up the gift. If you pick up the gift we give you, we know you won't be carrying anything else. Now that's not far away from our understanding of grace. You put down your weapons of resistance, and you're greeted with the gift, and the gift disarms you, and then you belong. And here's the strangest of things. What do we need to put down this Lent to truly become free, cheerful missionaries? In case you didn't know, this is the guy who tried to kill me. Rather than, notice how he holds this in wonderful juxtaposition. Rather than experts in dire predictions, dour judges bent on rooting out every threat and deviation, we should appear, what as? Joyful messengers of challenging proposals. There you go. Now, do you know what that means? This isn't a glee club, this isn't Walt Disney, but it does mean it doesn't work if you haven't told your face that you're happy. It doesn't work if you haven't told your face that you're happy. And I don't mean walk around with a forced grin, and you are entirely allowed to have bad days. St. Philip Neri. Cheerfulness strengthens the heart and makes us persevere. Do you know, it's a kind of lighten up message. Do you know something? Can you just do this? And I know it's a bit hard because we're tired, but can you go home happily? I like that idea. Even when you're on your own, treat yourself well. Even when you're on your own, cheer up. You're a good person. You're doing the best you can. Be prepared to change and learn to laugh. David Wells, learn to laugh at yourself. It's me, Dad. Don't take yourself too seriously or you'll do nothing. It'll just paralyse you. One of the reasons I think the world is really attracted to Pope Francis is his face. Yeah. Surely it can't be that easy, can it? I'm sure he's got a lot to worry about. 1.1 billion Catholics on the planet, that's quite a parish. Number 4, be gentle. Pope Francis talks a lot about this. Even in Laudato Si, he talks about being gentle with the planet, a theme. He uses this phrase a lot. Another virtue which stands out, one which is often overlooked in our world of frenetic and superficial relationships, is tenderness. He talks a lot about tenderness in Amoris Laetitia. The root of the word not being, there's 2 roots of the word tender. One of them is the tender that you apply to a bruise. You go, all that, oh. And it's not that one, it's the other one. The other root is the tender that you have at the back end of a steam engine. Right, you call it a tender. It carries coal to put in the steam engine. That's the root of this word. And what does it mean? It means accompany. Do you know what you're going to go? You know what you're going to be called to? You're going to be called to go and accompany some people gently. I know it's very tempting to kind of want to have the moment, but the moment is going to be gentle. Do you know that I still think the hardest people to evangelize are our families? Alright, so what does the church say? Accompany them. Sit inside their struggle and their pain and show them the reason for your joy. Just gently. Don't be over anxious. Because anxiety tends to put the wrong face on us and it wears our spirit down. The first step, writes Cardinal Vincent Nichols, is an encounter and an embrace, a sense of belonging rather than belonging after all necessary changes have taken place. After belonging, a concrete pathway to conversion can be opened up. So sometimes, you know something, I've discovered with my immediate family is my main method of evangelization to my children is to love them better, actually, and to pray for them that God will bring someone else in their life, perhaps, to do the more specific evangelization, the catechesis and the information they need to grow in faith. My job is to be their dad. And when they ask me, God willing, hear the question. This is a gentle process. Now, have you seen this? Oh, I've got some telly. You've got to watch some telly. Just take a look at that picture for a minute. It's real. It is a setup, but they're real people. They're not actors. It's a very powerful picture. I really like it. I'm using it a lot at the moment. Now, what's going on in that picture? I'm fascinated by this. So, if you watched Channel 5 before Christmas, there was a television series. It was called Bad Habits, Holy Orders. Now look at that picture again, because it's all set up. They're real people, but the photograph and the marketing of this series was very clever. Now, you know, it was a sort of a very late follow-up to the monastery, really, which basically had 5 glamour women, that's their language, in a convent for a month. And then they put their fly-on-the-wall documentary, what's going to happen to these women? And of course it was set up, it's a good programme, but you couldn't help believe that somehow the editors kind of wanted sparks, clashes, sensation, embarrassment. Look at how she's posed there, because it's all deliberate. That's a genuine quote. And I have to say, when I read that, I remember thinking, Sister Act, yeah, I get, but I'm not a lover of horror films. They scare me. Apparently they're supposed to. So I don't watch them. But nuns in horror films? Really? So some of you are clearly connoisseurs of nuns in horror films. Okay. Okay, this is the story of a nun and a glamour girl. I'm only going to do this briefly for you. But it goes a little bit like this. To be honest, there's a kind of a setup going on between Friday night meets Sunday morning. And you could feel that the idea somehow out of the programme was the assumption that things would clash. But something in the series starts to happen that the producers don't expect. And it's what Pope Francis calls accompaniment. They didn't call it that because they don't understand it, but we do. Is that, do you know what happens when authenticity meets vulnerability? People start to like each other. They do. People are good. Idealization gives way to reality, and what begins to creep in are very human skills, likeable skills, comforting skills of people who are more skilled than they could ever dream of, simply because they're happy. And then this happens. Gabby Ryan, 21, from southeast London, who tells emotionally of a divine transformation. Gabby is a lingerie and suggestive nudity model with over 20,000 Instagram followers. Ditching makeup and selfies inside was painful. Her penance, she said, was showing the nuns her modelling photos. I was petrified they would judge me, she said quietly, but instead, they got it right. They told me I was beautiful, but I didn't need the makeup and I didn't need the poses. And you go, now that's how you start. Because instead of starting with judgment, and what you need to change is, you start with dignity, with tenderness, with accompaniment. And I just thought, have a little look at that sometime. It's still on iPlayer. But do you know what's really lovely? The women in the religious order were also saying, these young women brought something to us. You see, because what happens in the teaching of the church is when you focus on mission, you lighten up. Stuff gets exciting. So everybody's being blessed in that photograph. In fact, according to Pope Francis, when you lose that, the church becomes ill too. Not what the producers expected. Okay, and lastly, and we've heard this several times during the course of the last 2 days, keep yourself moving. Keep moving. Well, we know this, don't we? You start to read Pope Francis. He's frequently tweeting, being with Jesus demands that we go out from ourselves and from living a tired and habitual faith. Notice it's always this juxtaposition between movement and paralysis. You see that in all 4 of his documents, this juxtaposition between, do you know something? Change something. Change something. Don't make your life awkward or difficult, but make sure, one of the things that's really impressed me this weekend is how you've never sat in the same seat twice. Yes, you have, haven't you? Do you know, it was amazing. I said to Jonathan on yesterday morning, I said, do you realise that almost everybody is sitting where they sat yesterday? It won't be long before we have territory, Notice this, because he does this a lot in Evangelize. A tomb psychology develops and slowly transforms Christians into mummies in a museum. Mummies in a museum. What is a mummy in a museum? A mummy in a museum is stuck. It's paralysed. It's not moving. And sometimes, folks, we become champions of the familiar. And we forget what it would be like to walk into a room for the first time and say to yourself, what on earth would somebody else make of this? And when we lose that, you know, we lose a little bit of our empathy. You know, when I first started taking Alison to Mass with me, you know, I remember it wasn't her that was getting conversion, it was me. I was sitting there seeing it through her eyes. You know, there's a man there with a handbag on fire. See, I know about incense, I grew up with it. I understand it. I see its roots in the Psalms. I know my praises and my prayers go before him like incense. I know how it helps. If you've never seen it before, what's it going to do? You know, really, it's really healthy occasionally, even not necessarily for the benefit of the other person, to go to Mass with somebody who has never been and notice what happens to you. It's fascinating. So there's something about these weekends which is about movement. We know, don't we, from the commission we receive from our deacons, go and announce the gospel of the Lord. Most people only hear the word go. And so what happens is that we forget that the movement is for a purpose. And that's the genius of this. You know, don't imagine that God's calling other people because they're a bit more spectacular than you. Don't imagine that because somebody can give a talk or sing a song or play a guitar that somehow he hasn't got a purpose for you. And the purpose is inside the detail of your life. It's already there, and the need and the hunger is all around us. And he's not asking us to solve it all. He's asking us to go in there with love. And you know, the hardest thing, in many respects, is overcoming our own inadequacies. Have a look at 2 Timothy. It's almost entirely a book devoted from an elder statesman, Paul, writing. He's old, he's tired, he's in jail, and he's writing to a young bishop, and he's saying, you know something, you can do this. And that letter's for all of us. You can do this. You have got what you need. There are lots of things to nourish us along the way, but don't think that there's a course you need to go on. The course, I'll tell you what it is now, the course you need to go on is having a go. That's the course. And being brave enough to make a fool of yourself. I love this because we're heading now towards our gospel. Victor Fernandez. Evangelization is not something to be given by the knowing to the unknowing. Follow me and I'll make you fishers of men is not understood here as a one after the other experience. The experience of being fishers of men converts the disciples. Now, I love this. I know you've heard me say it before, but I'm going to say it as long as I can stand up. Evangelization evangelizes the evangelizer. That's what happens. Do you know, I discovered this years ago, one of the reasons I love teaching because it turned out to be the way I learn. And in that way I understood this beautiful economy that Jesus gives. You know, the more you give, the more you'll receive. It makes sense to me because the more I teach it, the more I try and communicate it, the more I try and give it away, the more I'm blessed by it. It's the oddest thing. The more you chuck it, the more it comes back at you. Now that's just good news. Incidentally, quite strongly really, the last 4 popes have all been repeating this. Missionary activity renews the church, revitalises faith, and offers fresh enthusiasm. Here's the thing, you came to this, but you received something this weekend that is actually for somebody else. And the only way you'll truly get it is if you give it to them. How annoying is that? One of the things that I've always enjoyed about these weekends over the years is that they gather ultimately at the Eucharist. I mean, we've gathered here, but we're about to have the greatest of all gatherings. And you might be interested, you know, we started doing these about 18 years ago, and quite a lot of people have gone, moved on, and they're part of the communion of saints now. And one of the doctrines that I love of the church is the communion of saints, that we're united with all those people who've gone before us, marked with the sign of faith. And that's a lot of catechists from the diocese over the years who are going to be with us. And here's the thing, this is what I would love us to do, is during the offertory, just in your own time, in your own private prayer, you know, put yourself in there too. He's not finished with you. There's more work to be done, and he knows you can't do it on your own strength. So the beauty of gathering now around the table of the Lord is we bring ourselves a bit broken, a bit tired, a bit vulnerable, a bit confused, and we put all that into the offertory, and with everything else, it's transformed. And we will, gradually, we will get there, we will get there. So I want to thank you for being part of this weekend, and I'm going to hand over to Liz.